In the criminal underworld, violence and murder are at the crux of power wielded by organized crime. These criminal organizations have multiple members who are willing and able to commit murder whenever it is deemed necessary. However, there are some men who become so skilled at the job of murder that their crimes become legendary. These killers are calculating, prolific, efficient, and know how to send a message. These killers are organized crime's top hitmen. Number 16. Jorge Riverita Ayala. Jorge Ayala was born on September 6, 1957 in Cali, Colombia. As a child, he would immigrate with his family in 1969 to Chicago, Illinois, where he would grow up and begin learning about life on the street. Ayala's family was working class, and though they were far from well off, his family managed to avoid the abject poverty common to immigrants of that time. While living in Chicago, he started off as a car mechanic for his father at General Motors. Working as a mechanic with his father, young Jorge would acquire the skills necessary to break into cars, and as a teen, he would gravitate to a life of petty crime. Despite the best efforts of his father, Jorge soon became one of the biggest car thieves in the city, stealing cars for Chicago chop shops. He would reportedly make $200 to $500 per car and admitted to stealing up to 6 cars a night. Jorge soon realized that he was making more money as a criminal than working for his father, and decided with a couple of his partners in the car theft business to become full-time criminals. As a side hustle, he also worked in bringing immigrants into the country from over in Mexico. In the mid to late 1970s, Jorge Ayala, who was also known as Riverita, or Rivi for short, was hanging out at the Tropicana restaurant, which was his crew's headquarters of sorts. The crew would conduct business at the restaurant, and junkyards and chop shops would call the payphone there to reach them. Rivi had a specific spot in front of the Tropicana where he would always park his car, and people in the neighborhood knew not to park there. One morning, Rivi would arrive to find a car parked in his spot. When Rivi asked the restaurant owner who the car belonged to, the owner said the car belonged to a big shot from Miami. Not caring who the owner of the car was or what his status might be, Rivi decided to steal the car, thereby removing it from his parking space. The next day, 3 Colombians came in asking for a man named Riverita. Ayala stepped forward and told the man that he was Riverita, and if the man wanted his car back, it would cost him $500. The man's name was Cruz Gonzalez. He was impressed with Rivi's toughness and bravado and decided to pay the $500. The man, who would turn out to be a member of the Medellin cartel, offered Ayala $5,000 to drive some boxes to Florida. Ayala would immediately accept. While on the road, Ayala decided to check the boxes. To Ayala's surprise, the trunk was loaded with guns of all types, including automatic rifles. Once in Miami, another offer would be made to Ayala. This offer would change his life forever. Once in Miami, Jorge Riverita Ayala and his crew were offered $1,000 a day to handle logistics for the cartel, which essentially amounted to picking up money, delivering drugs, and other menial tasks. Things went well at first until one night at a local club in Miami called the Jacaranda, Rivi was approached by a man named Blanco, who he knew as a cartel member. The man told him that a hit was about to take place and that he and his friends should leave the club. On the way out, Rivi warned his partner, Carlos El Negro Vanegas, about the hit. Vanegas, not knowing who the targets were, inadvertently warned them about the hit while trying to warn a friend sitting at the same table as the targets. With the targets fleeing the club among other patrons, El Flaco informed Ayala that someone in his group had warned the targets and that he was in trouble. Ayala, after talking to Vanegas, realized the mistake that was made. After explaining the mistake to El Flaco, Ayala was told that he may still be in trouble and that Flaco's boss wanted to meet with him. This meeting would be another life-changing event for Ayala. On the ride to meet Flaco's boss, Ayala questioned if his life was in danger. Blanco would not guarantee that it wasn't, underlying the seriousness of the situation Ayala found himself in. They drove to a Holiday Inn off of I-95, and as they arrived, 4 men exited a car in the parking lot to his right, while another 4 exited another car to his left. The oldest man of the group approached and asked, "Are you Rivi?" After responding in the affirmative, the man who would turn out to be Dario Sepulveda led Rivi to a car where Sepulveda's wife, Griselda Blanco, was waiting. Ayala was surprised during his first encounter with Blanco. He had not expected a woman to be the boss, but within minutes of meeting her, it was obvious who was calling the shots. During their conversation, Blanco explained that they had been after the 2 brothers for months, and that night was the first night that they had caught sight of them. Ayala was shocked that she planned to spray the whole table of 6 just to kill 2 brothers. It gave him an idea about how ruthless this woman really was. Blanco then advised Ayala that he could make amends by finding the 2 brothers himself. On top of sparing his life, she would pay him $50,000 for each brother. Asking Flaco on the ride back to his car about Blanco, Flaco told Ayala, "She is the godmother, La Madrina. I've known her since Colombia, and she is deadly." Ayala was told in no uncertain terms that if he did not deliver, his own life would be in danger. Griselda Blanco had a rough background. She was born on February 14th in 1943 in Cartagena, Colombia, before moving to the city of Medellin at the age of 3. Griselda came of age during La Violencia, which was an era of Colombia characterized by political discord and extreme violence. Growing up in the streets of the poorest neighborhoods in Medellin, Blanco cut her teeth kidnapping the children of Colombia's business owners and rich aristocracy for ransom. After getting introduced to cocaine smuggling by her second husband, Alberto Bravo, Griselda Blanco became one of the Medellin cartel's largest, if not the largest, distributor of cocaine in the United States. After being dropped off by Flaco, Ayala met with his crew. His partner, Carlos El Negro Vanegas, knew the older of the 2 brothers, so a plan was put in place to set a meeting up between El Negro and the target. The plan was to snatch the older brother at the meeting and use him to get the younger brother. Vanegas paged the brother multiple times over the course of days with no luck. With Rivi and the crew losing hope, Vanegas decided to page again, and finally, the target returned the page. Vanegas then set up a meeting at the local Ramada Inn with the promise that he and Rivi had explosives and firearms for sale. Things became complicated, however, when the target arrived at the meeting with his 15-year-old son. Vanegas, thinking on his feet, told the target to leave his kid at the car. The target walked across the parking lot to Vanegas' car, and as Vanegas opened the trunk, Rivi came from behind some nearby bushes and stuck a pistol in the target's ribs. As Rivi pushed the target into the car, Rivi stated, "I've been looking for you." The man replied, "I don't know you nothing." To which Rivi responds, "There's a lady looking for you, and her name is Griselda Blanco." The target then cursed Blanco, saying he didn't owe her anything either. At this statement, one of the men with Rivi, Carlos Cumbamba Arango, knocked the target's teeth out while demanding more respect for the lady. When the target was made aware that they were on their way to meet Blanco, the man, according to Ayala, suddenly turned pale and started shaking. After turning the target over to Blanco's men, Rivi went home. The next day, Griselda Blanco arrived at Ayala's home during dinner. After sitting down for dinner, she tells Ayala how she shot the man, dismembered him, and left him in a box on the turnpike. If Ayala had any questions about the type of woman his new boss was, they were answered then and there. Ayala went to work directly for Blanco almost immediately after, learning how to use automatic weapons and explosives from an ex-military demolitions expert, and within a short period of time was considered to be Griselda Blanco's top enforcer. As Ayala soon found out, one thing Griselda Blanco did not tolerate was anyone disrespecting or harming her children in any way. Her son Osvaldo, who was in the cocaine business with his mother, fronted Miguel Perez and Nestor Garcia $250,000 worth of cocaine. Not knowing who was behind Osvaldo, Garcia and Perez stalled and eventually flat out refused to pay for the cocaine Osvaldo had fronted them. When word got back to his mother, the hit came down almost immediately. Nestor Garcia was gunned down by Rivarita using a silenced automatic pistol less than a quarter mile from a police station. This is believed to be Jorge Ayala's first time pulling the trigger during a hit. Miguel Perez was killed soon after on Lejeune Road after leaving the Omni shopping center. The Dadeland Mall shooting would be considered by many to be the opening salvo in the cocaine wars of Miami. The cause of the shooting dates back a year to 1978 when Germán Jiménez Paneso had his residence robbed by Jaime Suescon. Suescon was partners with Miami drug don Carlos Panelo Ramirez. Paneso and Ramirez were both being supplied their cocaine by Colombia's Medellin cartel and its female crew boss, Griselda, La Madrina, Blanco. On April 23, 1978, Suescon was lured to a Miami Beach townhouse under the pretense of selling the 10 keys of cocaine which was stolen from Paneso. In reality, it was a setup and Suescon was marked for execution. Paneso and his men beat and tortured Suescon to death. Even after Suescon's murder, Paneso's thirst for revenge wasn't quenched. He wanted Suescon's partner, Carlos Panelo Ramirez, to pay for the break-in as well. Ramirez went to Griselda Blanco for help. Blanco, who owed Paneso over $1 million, saw Paneso's beef with Ramirez as a way of eliminating her debt, as well as doing a favor that would have to be repaid in the future by Ramirez. She would order 2 of her most reliable assassins to murder Paneso as a favor to Ramirez. Blanco's brother-in-law, Miguel Paco Sepulveda, and her new hitman, Jorge Rivi Ayala, were put on the hit. Blanco would send the 2 hitmen to the Dadeland Mall around 2:30 in the afternoon on July 11, 1979. The well-armed hitmen entered Crown Liquors near the mall and opened fire on Germán Jiménez Paneso and his bodyguard, Juan Carlos Hernandez. The gunmen fled the scene in a phony delivery van marked Happy Time Complete Party Supply, which was abandoned in the far end of the mall parking lot. Police later described the van as a war wagon after an arsenal of firearms and bulletproof vests were discovered inside. A police officer at the scene dubbed the parties involved the Cocaine Cowboys. Dozens of rounds had been fired throughout the mall parking lot, riddling cars with bullets. When the smoke cleared from what police and witnesses described as a Wild West shootout, the drug dealer and his bodyguard were dead and 2 liquor store employees were wounded. Authorities would later officially connect Jorge Ayala to the Dadeland Mall shooting. The killing would continue in 1981 when Luis Papo Mejia came into conflict with Blanco. Ayala, on Griselda Blanco's orders, left for New York City to take on Mejia as well as his gang. During the conflict, Ayala is said to have killed 11 members of the gang in less than 24 hours. Ayala claimed there was supposed to be a 12th person killed, but he had let him go. After Rivi returned from New York City, he learned Griselda wanted to finish off the Mejia bloodline, so he followed Papo's father Octavio to the Pan American Mall in Miami. When Mejia Sr. left the mall, he was ambushed by Rivi and his men and was shot multiple times and killed. In a last-ditch attempt to kill Papo Mejia, Rivi decided to simply blow up the Mejia's Miami home. According to the Cocaine Cowboys documentary, when Griselda asked Rivi, "You're not going to miss this time, are you?" Rivi said that he answered, "No, I'm going to blow up the whole house." While Rivi did blow up the house, it turns out that no one was actually home during the explosion, so all Rivi did was cause a lot of structural damage and put even more eyes on the Miami drug war. Telling the story from prison, Rivi said that he used 200 sticks of dynamite and that the explosion was, quote, "so goddamn loud." Rivi notes in the documentary about the murders that many people in the Colombian drug community were pissed at Griselda because Mejia's father Octavio was not a part of the war. But she didn't give a shit, he said. She wanted him dead anyway. In 1982, Griselda Blanco ordered Ayala to kill Jesus Chuco Castro, one of her former enforcers. According to George Cadavid, a Miami police homicide detective, she wanted Castro dead after he had been hired to protect a drug supplier, but refused to carry out an unspecified order. However, Ayala claims that Blanco wanted Castro dead supposedly for an offense against one of her sons. Apparently, Osvaldo had disrespected Castro's home and was physically ejected from the property. Either way, the attempt on Castro's life occurred on February 6th that same year. The afternoon of the shooting, Miguelito Perez and Jorge Ayala drove up to the side of Jesus Castro's vehicle while he was stopped at a red light. There, they performed a drive-by shooting with a silenced machine gun. The bullets, however, missed Jesus Castro and accidentally hit his 2-year-old son Johnny, who was unknowingly present in the car with him. Years later, after he was arrested, Rivi told the police, "At first Griselda was real mad because we missed the father, but when she heard we had gotten the son by accident, she said she was glad, that they were even." Blanco's ruthlessness sometimes went too far for Rivi, as she would occasionally order the murder of entire families, including women and children. Rivi did not like the idea of murdering kids. However, some of her other enforcers, such as Miguel and Miguelito Perez, had no such qualms. Acting on Griselda Blanco's orders, Ayala and his crew killed drug-dealing married couple Alfredo and Graciela Lorenzo in their South Miami home on May 26, 1982. Their killings were the apparent result of a cocaine shipment which the couple had received from Blanco but failed to pay for. According to Ayala, Griselda Blanco had originally ordered the murder of everyone in the house, an order which Miguelito Perez was prepared to carry out. However, Ayala intervened, ordering Miguelito out of the house, thus making sure the kids of Alfredo and Graciela were not harmed. Griselda Blanco proved to Ayala time and time again how ruthless she was. Blanco even created a kill list which she gave to Rivarita. Oscar Piedra's name was near the top. At one point in the early 80s, Oscar Piedra oversaw Griselda Blanco's cocaine exports. However, a greedy Piedra decided to kidnap one of Blanco's sons, Osvaldo, and hold him for a $5 million ransom. According to Rivi, Blanco only paid $1 million and was extremely angry about the kidnapping. Afterward, Piedra disappeared and rose to the top 5 of Blanco's kill list. After Piedra's son died, his name and address appeared in the obituary section of the Miami Herald, something Rivi happened to read every day. Rivi and his men pulled up to the wake and asked for Piedra. Once at the car, Piedra was machine-gunned to death. In the mid-1980s, law enforcement began to close in on the Blanco organization. Griselda herself fled to California, and Jorge Ayala was arrested shortly after on bank robbery charges. While Ayala was in custody for the bank robbery, law enforcement was working feverishly to find Blanco's chief enforcer, known to them only as Rivarita. It didn't take long for them to realize that they already had the man they were looking for. After Rivi's arrest, Blanco was arrested on February 17, 1985, in her home by the Drug Enforcement Administration and charged with conspiracy to manufacture, import, and distribute cocaine. The case went to trial in federal court in New York City, where she was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years. While serving her sentence, she was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder by the state of Florida. The prosecution made a deal with Jorge Rivarita Ayala, who agreed to testify against her. However, the case collapsed due to technicalities relating to a phone sex scandal between Ayala and 2 female secretaries who worked in a state attorney's office. In 1998, Blanco pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison to run concurrently with other sentences. Ayala pleaded guilty in 1993 to 3 murders and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. However, the parole board denied his most recent opportunity. Rivi is currently housed at the Hamilton Correctional Facility in Jasper, Florida, and will soon be up for parole a second time. If released, Ayala will be deported to Colombia. Griselda Blanco was released in 2004 and was subsequently deported back to Colombia. In 2012, she would be murdered leaving a local butcher shop. Jorge Rivarita Ayala was one of the most dangerous hitmen in history. Connected by law enforcement to 35 murders and suspected of many more, He, like many of his contemporaries in the cocaine wars, was bold and ruthless. What set him apart was his ability to plan and the skill with which he would execute his targets. Ayala was, without a doubt, one of organized crime's top hitmen.